Well, for more on this issue of hostages and deals, we're now joined on the line from Haifa in Israel by Nimrod Goren, who is president of the Mitvim Institute, the Israeli Institute for Regional Foreign Policies. He's also a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute. First of all, I want to thank you, Mr. Goren, for joining us. We do appreciate you taking the time. I want to begin by asking you, we were just looking there at the case of Gilad Shalit. This time, this deal about the release of the mostly women and children, do you think that Israel is paying a high price for the release of these hostages?
I think first it's a necessity. For the Israeli society, it's really important to bring the hostages back. And I think the society understood, and so did the policymakers, that it's not possible to do it all in one bunch this time around. So there was a priority for the humanitarian cases, the children, the women, the elderly. And for that, the price in terms of numbers is much lower than what you mentioned before regarding Gilad Shalit. But the price here that Israel is paying is not only in terms of the numbers, it's also in terms of what does it mean for the war operations on the ground, for achieving Israel's war objectives. It requires Israel to cease the fire for a few days, to allow more humanitarian aid, to allow Hamas some time to rearrange itself before the next phase arrives. So Israel is paying the price, not only the numbers of people released, but eventually I think it's worth it and it's the right decision.
Now, there was a lot of discussion in the Israeli cabinet before the final decision to approve this deal. Can you give us some idea of what the different arguments were within cabinet?
The discussion took place both in the war cabinet, in the regular cabinet, and eventually the government all had to approve the deal according to the Israeli regulation processes. Then there were time for people to appeal to the Supreme Court. This is happening today on the names of those Palestinian prisoners that are supposed to be released. Almost all of the parties supported that. We are talking about one far-right party that opposed it. All the others were on board. I think it reflects a consensus in our society that it is a responsibility to bring each and every one home whenever possible and to do what is needed. There was consensus among the military and security establishment that presented to the government the deal and its consequences, and everybody basically said the upsides are much stronger than the downsides, and therefore, despite the real extremists in government, all others approved it.
And I gather Netanyahu told some of his colleagues around the table that he was being advised by Joe Biden that it was the best deal for now. How important do you think that argument would have been?
American support is important for Israel. I think it's not only about the advisory of Biden, but also the credit that Biden got by the prime minister for even improving the deal. So it was said that the deal that was basically rejected by Israel some days ago has been improved. The numbers of those released have been increased. The amount of time for the ceasefire has been decreased. And that is thankful to efforts by Biden, the American mediation. So definitely, I think Israelis appreciate the support that the U.S. has been giving to Israel from day one after the Hamas terror attack on October 7th, and since, including in everything related to mediating hostage release.
And what changed so that Hamas were prepared to agree this deal? What pressure was there on them?
I think for Hamas side, the military activities by Israel over the last few weeks really caused damage to Hamas, its ability to continue its terror attacks against Israel or even governing Gaza. So therefore, there was a need for some pause in the fighting. So I think Hamas, it was important for them to get those several days without military activity against them. In Gaza, it was also in terms of resupplying perhaps a bit less of Israeli intelligence surveillance with UAVs for several hours a day. That was part of the deal as well. So I think Hamas gets some time that it needed to rearrange. But I think everybody agrees that it's not the end. It's not the deal that includes all prisoners, all hostages. That will happen later on. So Hamas still keeps some of its cards that it has. Many precious Israeli lives will remain in Gaza, and efforts to release them will continue. And so will the military operation. Once those days of pause will be over, I think Israel-Hamas will once again find themselves fighting in the streets of Gaza.
I just want to broaden this out slightly. Perhaps you can give us an idea, as you're in Israel, what do Israelis think of international criticism of Israel's action in Gaza in response to October the 7th? Are they worried by mounting international criticism, or do they think we're on our own, we're always on our own?
It's a combination, because Israelis are generally sensitive to what the world thinks about us. Nevertheless, there is an assumption that our security needs are not understood the way Israelis would like them to be understood generally on the global scale. But what is happening this time after October 7th, that Israel's strongest allies, whether it's the US, whether it's European countries, are standing aside Israel in terms of the war objectives, in terms of the goal of having Hamas not rule Gaza anymore, and not pose a terror threat on Israel anymore, and having the hostages released. So the war objectives, there is agreement between Israel and the leaders of the most important countries for us, even in the region, even in the Arab world. Some people will not say it up front, but share some of these aspirations by Israel. On the other hand, there is a popular, and we see demonstration, and we see the opposition on the street to what Israel is doing. And I think Israel said, as long as we have those allies that are important with us on board, we can manage the image issue on the street, and we can even try to flip it as much as possible.
Well, thanks very much. I want to thank you, Nimrod Goren, for your analysis on all of that. Thank you very much for giving us your time from Haifa there in Israel. Thanks very much to Nimrod Goren.